Many people have been talking about what kind of agenda should keep us going as we're shut in and as we isolate socially from one another to keep safe. Lots of suggestions have been made about how to keep eating healthily and economically and not wasting things unnecessarily, but also how to keep fit. Let me share with you an agenda to keep fit mentally and spiritually during a time when we're shut in. When we look at the Bible and think about someone who was shut in, we think immediately of the Apostle Paul, who wrote 3 epistles while he was in prison. And it talks about his imprisonment, the second imprisonment in Rome, in chapter 4 of 2 Timothy, which is where I want us to think for a moment. What is Paul's agenda? For him, he was coming near the end of his life. He talks to Timothy, his young protege. He gives him lots of great advice about keeping the gospel in the forefront of his mind and bearing witness to that and sharing that whenever he can. But he also talks about his own feelings as he's imprisoned and he's constrained. The evangelist who traveled widely and spoke so often to so many people and founded so many churches is actually now constrained and imprisoned. So what do we find him doing? We find him, as every Christian always ought to be, looking forward to heaven, looking forward to the future, what God has in store for those who love him, but not just looking forward to the distant future, but looking forward to the immediate future, because he's determined in however long the Lord gives him, be it short or long, that he will serve the Lord to the uttermost. He may be constrained, but he's still concerned about what's going on in the churches. He refuses wonderfully in the time that he has, which could easily be a time to reminisce and regret and feel bitter about things. He refuses to bear any grudges for people who have disappointed him or let him down in the past. Have a look at what he says from 2 Timothy 4:9 onwards. He's feeling a bit lonely and cold as the winter sets in, but he's rejoicing in what God has done. He says, I have been enabled by God to fight the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. I've walked with the Lord since he saved me, and I look forward to all that he has for me. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also all who have loved his appearing. Verse 8. But in the meantime, as he looks back like that, he not only doesn't bear grudges against people who he has found very difficult, even dangerous in the case of some unbelievers in their opposition against him, but some believers who have disappointed him. He says very carefully, Alexander the coppersmith, verse 14, did me great harm. The Lord will repay him. I'm leaving that with the Lord. At my first defense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. May it not be charged against them. In other words, like the Lord, he says, Lord, forgive them. He's not bearing grudges, nor is he bearing undue regrets. His own sin have been left at the foot of the cross and have been forgiven. And so Paul is very positive. He's not depressed or wistfully or regretfully looking back. He's grateful to God, not only for all that God has done in his life, but the people that he has given him around him to support him. He says in verse 11, Luke alone is with me. Luke has stood by him as being a tremendous friend. He talks in verse 19 about Prisca and Aquila, a couple who've been a wonderful support in gospel work. But above all, he says in verse 17, but whatever the comings and goings of life, The Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. Throughout my life, says Paul, I want to bear witness at this point of how the Lord has stood by me. Whatever about other people, the Lord has been my constant supportive presence through life's journey. So Paul has a great confidence in the Lord's presence with him. And look what he's doing. He asks for manuscripts, for parchments in verse 13. He's going to keep writing letters. He's going to keep doing what he can to serve the Lord and to serve others in his name. He's going to show loving concern for others. And he's going to do it, whatever the constraints he can, by letters, by phone calls. In our case, by phone calls. There was no easy media for Paul as there is for us. But we can encourage those around us and care still for those around us. A phone call to those who are shut in and feeling lonely can make such a world of difference. A gentle testimony to the difference Christ can make could change a person's whole life. So in terms of our agenda being shut in, let's follow the Apostle Paul. Let's look forward to what God has in store for us in the present and in the future. Let's trust him. Let's trust him to stick by us as he has right from the time that we gave our lives to Christ. And let's be positive in terms of doing what we can to further the good news of the gospel and the loving care of Christ to our neighbours and our friends. Paul was like that. He didn't allow depression or despondency to creep into his life. He looked to the Lord and kept giving himself in the service of others right to the very end. May we be like that in life's journey too, and learn from the example of the Apostle Paul in this respect. That's a good agenda for being shut in.